The myth of Russia's inexhaustible human resources has finally been shattered. The publication Glavred reports, as of February 2026, the Kremlin is facing an unprecedented crisis. There are no more people willing to fight for money, and covert mobilization is experiencing critical failures. Why have even record payouts of millions of rubles stopped motivating Russians? How have massive losses turned the Russian army into a black hole? And what did Putin come up with when he realized that his soldiers were simply running out? Right now, we will analyze intelligence and economists' data that predict the collapse of the Russian war machine. And you can find more information in our report. My name is Yevhen Sirov. This is the Glavred channel. Subscribe and leave a like. Let's get started. For a long time, Russia was plugging holes at the front with a money pump. In some regions, signing bonuses for contracts reached an astronomical 3 to 4 million rubles. However, as Glavred notes, this resource has been exhausted. The problem is that potential mercenaries from the poorest regions have either already died or returned disabled. The fear of death has finally outweighed the desire for profit. An even more catastrophic shortage of workers at civilian enterprises has forced businesses to raise salaries in order to retain staff. Now, working at a factory in the rear is becoming a more profitable and, more importantly, safer alternative for a Russian than a trench near Kupiansk. The quality of those who still end up being dragged into the army is rapidly declining. Glavred emphasizes that in 2026, the average age of a Russian volunteer exceeded 45 to 50 years. These are people with a host of chronic illnesses, incapable of enduring prolonged strain or complex maneuvers. Russia is literally consuming its own future. The mass death of young men and the flight of hundreds of thousands of specialists abroad have created a demographic hole that will be impossible to fill for decades. The Russian General Staff is in a panic. To maintain the intensity of their offensive, they need at least 30,000 new soldiers per month, but the actual recruitment numbers barely reach a third of that amount. The occupiers are forced to throw technicians, cooks, and even wounded soldiers who haven't fully recovered in hospitals into battle. Putin is faced with an impossible task: either announce a full-scale official mobilization, close the borders, and impose martial law across the entire country, or admit defeat and retreat. However, open mobilization carries a huge risk of social upheaval. The Glavred article points out that the Kremlin fears the reaction of the major cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg. It's one thing to send residents of depressed outskirts to their deaths, and quite another to start pulling the golden youth and middle class en masse out of the offices of the metropolises. Each such decision brings Russia closer to internal destabilization, which the Kremlin fears so much. But the front does not wait. Without reinforcements, the Russian defense may collapse under the pressure of the technologically superior Ukrainian armed forces. Russia has found itself in a trap of its own making. The Russian army has turned into a giant conveyor belt for the disposal of human resources.